in my opinion, could produce resonant effects in the cars that you see that are toasted, because there are certain things in cars that are not affected by torsion waves, which I think is what, in effect, we're dealing with here. And I do realize that Dr. Wood does not give much credit in her book, at least as far as I'm aware. I have not been able to finish the whole book, so I may be saying things that do not reflect her current state of research. So if that's the case, please understand I haven't been able to finish reading the whole book. But in my opinion, aluminum is one of those things that, according to Russian research, damps the effects of torsion. And I think you're seeing with some of these toasted cars, with the engine blocks remaining intact, with other parts of the car just being literally melted to nothing, I think you're looking at similar kinds of resonant effects there. I think when she talks about some of the on-the-ground witnesses that record being picked up and literally levitated several feet away from where they were by some sort of pressure, by some sort of wave, again, that you're looking at effects of this kinds of technology. So the bottom line for me is, I think that hers is the only hypothesis that adequately attempts to account for all the different kinds of damage that we see in New York City with respect to the World Trade Centers. I do think that we are looking at some sort of electromagnetic interferometry-based weapon that was used. I know that Dr. Wood does not, in her book, herself speculate as to who pulled that trigger and why. I have my own suspicions about who and why, but that's a rather different argument than the one that she's trying to make.
We respect your hesitance to speak too much in the open, but she did mention something that caught me from a transmutation standpoint. She mentioned that a lot more zinc was found in the dust than could have been accounted for with the aluminum and other metals. It seems to have transmuted into zinc.
It may have been the case. Again, like I said, I haven't finished reading all of her book. I don't know, therefore, what the state of her latest research is. And therefore it's difficult for me to comment on that aspect of it. I don't personally think that we need to go to explanations of possible transmutations. But then again, as I say, I have not read her book in its entirety yet, so I haven't come across that aspect of the data. And if there is data to suggest that there was transmutational effects occurring, then yeah, we have to look even more closely at the type of weapon that might have produced that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farrell.
Thank you.
Joseph, I've got a couple of easy questions for you here after the...
Okay.
This is fairness, by the way. Have proposed that there are survivors from a cosmic war, elites with an agenda. Mm-hmm. And you've also proposed that there are two groups of these, one wanting a closed system, and they don't want us to figure things out. And the second one is an open system where they do want us to figure things out. Okay, here's my questions. Who are these elite, and are they on or off the planet? Do they own the planet? And if so, what are the implications of this, especially legally? And are they related to us?
My suspicion is both of these elites are definitely on the planet. They may be off the planet or connected with portions of them off the planet, but my model has always been to assume that they're on this planet. The closed system people are definitely the ones that are predominant. They're the most visible. They're the ones that we associate with, the large banking family dynasties, going all the way back to Venice and those times during the Guelph Ghibelline dispute in the Holy Roman Empire. So that elite has been here, I think, all along. They have certainly been the most successful in promoting their agenda. There have been allusions from time to time that the other elite is here as well, but they have been much less successful, in my opinion anyway, in promoting their agenda. So much so that I find it difficult today to find evidence that they are powerful enough even to be noticed. They may be. There are people that are arguing that they are here and that they are being rather successful. The other difficulty I have is I cannot look at any group being proposed, and I'll be very blunt and I'll be very honest here, and this will put me at odds with many people writing on this subject. But I do not see or identify with any of the groups being proposed, the followers of Horus, the Shemsu Hor, Isaac Asimov's second foundation idea, all of these things. I cannot identify any of these groups as being particularly good, because one of the consequences of the idea that the physical medium and consciousness are so directly interfaced is that you do not need, by the nature of the case, that kind of thing does not need any special revelations or institutions to represent it, because everybody does this by dint of being human to begin with.
Correct, yes.
So I have great difficulty in looking at any of the groups that others are proposing as being the good elite. I have difficulty looking at any of them as being that good elite. They may have good intentions, but that doesn't necessarily make them a good elite. Because by the nature of the case, I think the so-called good elite is a kind of a democratized elite. It's an elite of shared concepts, broad concepts, if you want to call it the Philosophia Perennis, use that old designation for it, or the Theologia Priscus, the ancient theology, if you want to use that designation for it. That elite, I think, has existed simply by dint of the fact that there are people that adhere to those principles. It is not a formal or an institutional elite. That's why it's hard to pin it down. And I think that those who are looking to do so have the wrong model to begin with. They haven't understood the physics of it adequately. So I think, anytime you're pointing fingers at this group or that group and saying, well, that's the good elite, by the nature of the case, you've already damaged your case that they are. I hope that makes sense. That's about as open as I dare be with this subject right now.
Yes, I can understand that and very much appreciate it. But the other thing I'm interested in is who owns the planet and what's the implications of this. You referred briefly to that earlier, and that's about patents.
Yes. Well, this goes back to the idea that if we take certain ancient stories at their word, at their face value, and assume, number one, that this planet was visited by someone out there, let's call them our genetic cousins, and that they came here, they set up shop here, they started to, quite literally, to terraform the planet, and agriculture is a form of terraforming. Let's just be very blunt. They started to terraform the planet and engineered us into existence. Well, yeah, under most systems of patent law that would make us property. Now, as to who owns it now, I certainly think that the bankster elite thinks they own it. Okay.
Yes.
I think this is their understanding of their own station in life. I view them as nothing but parasites, but they view themselves as, sort of demigods and doing all of this stuff, for the greater good of the humanity in spite of all the lives that they ruin and misfortune and havoc that they wreak. I think their attitude is, well, we own the planet. And in fact, several years ago, that elite had a gathering of like minds in Colorado called the World Wilderness Congress, in which they were proposing a new system of currency based on all the collateralized wilderness land of the world. So in other words, to even propose such a harebrained scheme, and of course it's all coming out of the brain trust of the Rothschilds, all the familiar names. Well, even to propose such a kooky idea, you have to assume to a certain extent that you own it to begin with in order to collateralize it in that fashion. All right, so you've got a certain vanity with these people that just knows no bounds, quite literally.
It also sounds like they're the victims of their own social engineering in a way.
They're the victim. Yes, they are. This is a very good point that you make, and I've pointed it out any number of times on the Bite Show. When you surround yourself by people of a like mind so much, you begin to think in terms of your own box. In other words, these elites, I think, are having difficulty in dealing with what's happening in the world right now, precisely because they put themselves into their own box for so long, they can't think outside of it anymore, and they don't even know where to find the analysts and advisors to do that either. So, to a certain extent, they're using old models that I think are breaking down very rapidly. As for who really owns the planet, let's assume we have those genetic cousins. Well, if they're still out there, then they would certainly have a claim to, and given their behavior as recorded in some ancient texts, they're little better than the banksters, and probably think that they have a claim to it too. So, it's anybody's guess. I don't care who owns the planet, because ultimately, it's about the fact that you cannot own the person who says I.
Yes.
And you have only to look at some of the statements of Alexander Solzhenitsyn that he made to the Soviet magistrates that put him in the Gulag, to see that you can take everything from a man and even dampen and lessen his will, but you can never take that person that says I.
Correct.
It's another way of saying what Christ said in the Gospels. Fear him who can kill the soul, not the body. And that's the point. Ultimately, if you look at this ancient perennial philosophy and understand it correctly, not in the New Age nonsense that's floating about now, that at death you get reabsorbed into the cosmic all. The indications in that perennial philosophy of personal immortality are fairly clear. So I